Beneath the streets of the United Kingdom lies a second world, a world of concrete tunnels, flickering lights, and shadowy platforms where history refuses to rest. For millions, the underground is just part of the daily commute. But for some, it's a one-way trip into the unknown. From phantom passengers who vanish in the blink of an eye, to the cries of the dead echoing through sealed-off tunnels. These are not just urban legends. These are chilling accounts from staff, commuters, and investigators who swear something sinister haunts the depths. Tonight, we descend into the darkest corners of the UK rail system to uncover the secrets buried below. These are the most haunted underground stations in the UK. Bethnel Green Station, London. Deep beneath the bustling streets of East London lies a station that holds one of the darkest secrets in the history of London's underground. A place where tragedy struck in the depths of World War II, and where the echoes of that horrific night continue to haunt commuters and station staff to this day. This is the site of Britain's single largest loss of civilian life during World War II, and a place where 173 souls may have never truly left the platform. March 3rd, 1943. London was deep into the darkest days of World War II. The Blitz had officially ended 2 years earlier, but the threat of German bombing raids still loomed over the city like a constant shadow. Londoners had learned to live with fear, and when the air raid sirens wailed, they knew exactly where to go. Bethnel Green Underground Station, located in the heart of East London, had become one of the largest air raid shelters in the capital. During the air raids and bombings of London in the Blitz, it was common for Londoners to hide in London Underground stations and tunnels for protection. The station could accommodate up to 7,000 people, and on that fateful Wednesday evening, families from across the borough were making their way to what they believed was safety. But Bethnel Green Station was different from other underground shelters. The Central Line platforms were still under construction. The station wouldn't officially open for passengers until 1946. What existed in 1943 was a half-finished tube station with a single entrance and a steep staircase of 19 steps leading down into the depths. At 8:17 p.m., the air raid siren began its haunting wail across East London. Families grabbed their children, their belongings, and hurried through the blackout streets toward the familiar orange glow of the station entrance. Within minutes, hundreds of people were streaming down that narrow staircase, seeking refuge from what they expected to be another night of German bombing. What happened next would become the UK's worst civilian disaster of World War II. A woman fell on the stairs, taking several people with her. In the panic that followed, hundreds of people were crushed together in the narrow stairwell, and 173 lost their lives. The victims ranged in age from just 5 months to 84 years old. 62 of them were children. These weren't casualties of enemy action. They were victims of panic, of poor design, and of circumstances that aligned in the most tragic way possible. After the accident in 1943, the government wanted the details kept private to avoid suggestions of public panic. For decades, the true story of what happened that night was suppressed, buried in official reports and classified documents. The families of the victims were left to grieve in silence, their loved ones' deaths treated as a state secret. The first reports of paranormal activity began almost immediately after the station reopened. Workers complained of strange sounds echoing through the empty tunnels. One of the most frequently reported phenomena is that of the sound of children crying, not just quiet sobs, but heart-wrenching wails that seem to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Night shift workers describe hearing these ghostly children, their voices rising from the ticket hall area where so many young lives were lost. But it's not just children. Witnesses report the terrifying sounds of women screaming, desperate, panicked voices calling out in the darkness. These phantom screams start as whispers, then grow louder and more frantic, building to a cacophony of terror that abruptly ceases. In 1981, a lone employee working the night shift experienced something so disturbing that he refused to work alone at the station ever again. Though he never fully disclosed what he witnessed, colleagues said he was visibly shaken for weeks afterward. As the years passed, more and more people came forward with their experiences. The paranormal activity wasn't limited to just sounds. People began reporting figures moving through the tunnels, always just at the edge of vision. One of the most disturbing discoveries came during station renovations. When developers began excavation work, they made a horrifying discovery. Human remains were found at a density of approximately 8 bodies per cubic meter in certain areas of the station. The physical evidence of the tragedy was literally built into the foundation of the underground tunnels. And where physical trauma remains, spiritual trauma often follows. The phantom crowds are another frequently reported phenomenon. Station workers describe hearing the murmur of a large crowd when the station is completely empty. The ghostly echo of the victims of the tragedy back in 1943. Security cameras have captured unexplained movements in areas that are deserted. Motion sensors trigger without cause. And the children's voices. They're still heard, echoing through the tunnels in the early hours of the morning, when the last train has departed and the station falls silent. Paranormal investigators who've studied the station believe the traumatic energy from that night in 1943 has created what they call a residual haunting, a psychic imprint so powerful that it continues to replay the tragedy over and over again. Some witnesses even claim to see the ghostly figure of a woman carrying a baby, endlessly descending the steps where it all began. The first victim of the disaster, forever trapped in her final moments. Another apparition that has been reported on numerous occasions is that of a small girl sitting on the steps of the station, crying and sobbing. Many people report trying to approach her, but as they do, her sobbing becomes louder and she slowly just fades away. The public announcement system has occasionally broadcast distorted whispers, especially late at night. Some reports claim the voices repeat the names of the dead, or whisper, "Help us," or "They fell." Engineers have found no technical faults during these events. One paranormal group in the 1990s reported a sensation of being underground during the Blitz, hearing distant bomb blasts, crying, and even the smell of smoke and damp clothing, despite the station being quiet and empty. As we leave the shadows of Bethnel Green Station behind, it's important to remember that behind every ghost story are real people who lived and tragically died. The 173 souls lost on that March night in 1943 weren't just statistics. They were mothers, fathers, children and grandparents seeking nothing more than safety in a time of war. Perhaps what we call paranormal activity is simply their way of ensuring that they are not forgotten. Aldwych Station, London. Aldwych, also known as Strand Station, this forgotten piece of the London Underground has been sealed away from the public for decades. But the spirits that roam its platforms seem to have never gotten the memo that the last train has long since departed. Aldwych Station opened on November 30th, 1907, as part of the Great Northern Piccadilly and Brompton Railway, what we now know as the Piccadilly Line. Originally called Strand Station, it was built to serve the theatre district and the legal quarter around the Royal Courts of Justice. From the very beginning, Aldwych was plagued with problems. The station was built on a short branch line that only ran between Holborn and Aldwych. Just 2 stops. This made it incredibly inconvenient for passengers, as they had to change trains at Holborn to continue their journey anywhere else on the network. The station's fortunes declined rapidly. Passenger numbers were consistently low, and by the 1930s, it was clear that Aldwych was more of a financial burden than a useful transport link. The writing was on the wall when the last regular passenger service ran on September 30th, 1994, though the station had been operating on a severely reduced timetable for years before that. During World War II, Aldwych found new purpose as an air raid shelter, protecting Londoners from the Blitz. The platforms were converted to accommodate hundreds of people seeking refuge from the bombing above. But perhaps more significantly, the station's tunnels were used to store precious artifacts from the British Museum, including the famous Elgin marbles, keeping Britain's cultural treasures safe from Nazi bombs. After the war, the station briefly reopened for passenger service, but it never recovered its pre-war usage. The final nail in the coffin came in 1994, when London Underground decided the cost of upgrading the aging infrastructure simply wasn't justified by the handful of daily passengers. Since its closure, Aldwych has become a hotbed of paranormal activity, with numerous reports from security guards, maintenance workers, and film crews who have used the atmospheric location for movies and TV shows. The most frequently reported phenomenon is the sound of trains pulling into the station late at night. Security guards patrolling the tunnels have described hearing the unmistakable screech of brakes and the hiss of doors opening, followed by the echo of footsteps on the platform, despite the fact that no trains have run on these tracks for nearly 3 decades. One particularly chilling account comes from a British transport police officer who was conducting a routine security check in 2003. He reported seeing a figure standing on the platform, apparently waiting for a train. When he called out, the figure turned toward him, revealing the pale, gaunt face of a woman in wartime dress. As he approached, she opened her mouth wide and let out a blood-curdling scream before she turned and ran, fading away as she did so. The most disturbing reports center around the old air raid shelter areas. During the war, several people died in the tunnels, some from natural causes, others from accidents in the cramped, poorly lit conditions. Maintenance workers have reported cold spots, unexplained whispers in empty tunnels, and the feeling of invisible hands grabbing at their clothing. Film crews working in the station have captured unexplained audio recordings, voices speaking in the background of scenes where no actors were present, and the sound of air raid sirens echoing through empty tunnels during quiet moments between takes. Perhaps the most famous ghost story involves the phantom passenger. Multiple witnesses have reported seeing a man in a London Underground uniform from the early 1900s walking along the tracks, carrying an old-fashioned signal lamp. He's described as checking the tunnels, as if still performing his duties, completely unaware that his shift ended decades ago. The most famous ghost said to haunt Aldwych is believed to be a woman in early 20th century clothing, often spotted on or near a disused platform. She's thought to be the spirit of an Edwardian actress from the nearby Royal Strand Theatre, demolished in 1905, which once stood above the station. Witnesses describe her as silent and pale, often vanishing into walls or walking into sealed-off tunnels. One engineer reported hearing heels clicking on the platform, only to see a woman in period dress vanish before his eyes. There is also a sealed metal door deep in the lower service tunnels. Engineers and paranormal teams have reported muffled screams or pounding sounds coming from behind it. Investigations always find nothing. Some believe the door seals off an area used as a makeshift morgue during World War II. A psychic who visited the site claimed that someone was locked in there and never made it out. Some visitors have reported hearing manic female laughter echoing through the empty station. One film crew member described it as, quote, laughter that turns into sobbing, though no one else was in the station at the time. The laughter often occurs in bursts, followed by a sudden drop in temperature. A lesser-known but consistent report involves a young child, often a girl in ragged wartime clothing, seen just outside the old staff quarters. She has been spotted peeking around corners or standing silently in the distance before disappearing. During an overnight investigation in 2011, one researcher claimed to hear her humming a haunting war-era tune with no source found. Today, Aldwych Station remains sealed to the public, accessible only to authorized personnel and the occasional film crew. But those brave enough to venture into its depths continue to report encounters with the restless spirits who seem to have made the abandoned platforms their eternal home. Bank Station, London. Bank Station, one of London's busiest interchange stations, sits at the very heart of the City of London's financial district. But what most passengers don't realize as they rush through its maze-like tunnels is that they're walking through what is essentially a vast underground cemetery. The station opened in 1900, but its location has a much darker and older history. The site sits directly above the former churchyard of St. Mary Woolnoth, and more significantly, it's built on the burial grounds of several plague pits from the Great Plague of 1665. When London was devastated by the bubonic plague, tens of thousands of bodies were hastily buried in mass graves throughout the city. The area around what is now Bank Station was one of these locations, a final resting place for countless souls who died in agony and fear. During the station's construction and subsequent expansions, workers repeatedly encountered human remains. In 1900, during the original construction, laborers discovered layers upon layers of skeletal remains. But the most disturbing discovery came in the 1960s, during major renovation work. Construction crews unearthed what historians believe to be a plague pit containing hundreds of bodies, many still showing signs of the rapid, desperate burial methods used during the epidemic. The station's complex layout, with its warren of tunnels connecting multiple lines, was built around and sometimes directly through these burial sites. The Northern, Central, District, Circle, Metropolitan, Hammersmith and City, and Waterloo and City lines all converge here, creating a labyrinthine network that seems to trap more than just commuters. But it's not just the plague victims that haunt this location. In 1941, during the London Blitz, Bank Station suffered a direct hit from a German bomb. The blast killed 56 people who had sought shelter in the station during an air raid. Many of these victims were never properly recovered, their remains absorbed into the very foundations of the station. The paranormal activity at Bank Station is so well documented and persistent that it's become something of an open secret among London Underground staff. Workers have been reporting inexplicable encounters for over a century, and these reports share disturbing similarities that are impossible to dismiss. The most frequently reported phenomenon is the appearance of a figure known as the Black Nun. Dozens of staff members and passengers have described seeing a tall figure in dark robes gliding through the tunnels, particularly in the early morning hours before the station opens to the public. The figure appears to be searching for something or someone, moving with purpose through areas that should be completely empty. Maintenance workers have reported tools moving on their own, footsteps echoing through empty tunnels, and the distinct sound of sobbing coming from walls where no one could possibly be. One particularly disturbing account from a night engineer describes hearing what sounded like dozens of people moaning in pain, as if suffering from illness, emanating from beneath the platform floors. The station's CCTV system has captured numerous unexplained anomalies. Security footage has shown figures walking through areas that are confirmed to be empty, shadows moving independently of any light source, and most chillingly, the image of what appears to be plague victims, gaunt figures in period clothing, standing on platforms during the early morning hours. Passengers have reported feeling invisible hands grabbing at them while waiting for trains, particularly on the Northern Line platforms. Multiple witnesses described the sensation of someone breathing on their neck, only to turn around and find no one there. Some have reported seeing faces pressed against train windows as carriages pull away, faces that appear diseased or decomposing. One of the most documented incidents occurred in 2003, when a London Underground employee was working alone in a service tunnel beneath the station. He reported hearing the sound of hundreds of people walking above him, despite knowing the station was closed. When he investigated, he found the platforms completely empty, but the sounds continued for over an hour. Security cameras showed him standing alone, clearly distressed, but no explanation was ever found for the sounds he described. Perhaps most disturbing are the reports of passengers who have gone missing at Bank Station. While official records are understandably scarce, urban legends persist of people entering the station who simply never emerged. Some staff members whisper about finding personal belongings, wallets, phones, jewelry, in areas of the station that haven't been accessed by the public in decades. Staff and passengers have reported panicking for no reason, or suddenly becoming nauseous or overwhelmed with stress. In one incident, a worker described a feeling of being, quote, mentally pulled into a nightmare while walking alone in the tunnels at night. Several people have reported seeing the apparition of a small boy, sometimes holding a toy or waving at passengers before vanishing. One woman in the 2000s described entering a nearly empty carriage at Bank Station, seeing a child sitting alone, then noticing he had no reflection in the window. Others report hearing childlike giggles echoing between platforms when no children are present. Bank Station was never meant to be a resting place, but death has a way of claiming spaces that belong to the living. The station was built for movement, for progress, for the rush of modern life. Instead, it became a monument to London's forgotten dead. Hyde Park Corner Station, London. Hyde Park Corner Station opened in 1906 as part of the Piccadilly line, but the land it occupies holds a darker past. Long before the tube tunnels, the area was used as a site for executions and burials dating back to the 17th and 18th centuries. Criminals, plague victims, and rebels were buried in unmarked graves nearby, many believed to still rest beneath the park. During World War II, the station's tunnels were repurposed as air raid shelters and secret military stores. The underground labyrinth expanded with sealed-off tunnels for classified operations. Part of the station's history is that of a tunnel collapse during a Blitz air raid, trapping military personnel inside, their bodies never recovered. Today, This sealed section lies untouched, but staff report eerie signs of life, as if something remains trapped below. As night deepens and the station empties, the silence has been reported to be broken by desperate screams and frantic banging echoing from one of the bricked-up tunnels, a sealed-off passage that no one dares enter. Those who have heard these cries say the voices plead for help, fading suddenly into chilling silence, with one late-night engineer even recalling a whispered plea of, quote, "Don't leave us here." But it's not just sounds that haunt Hyde Park Corner. Infrared cameras have captured the unsettling apparition of a man in a bloodied World War II uniform, wandering the trackside with eyes gouged out. Night supervisors who have glimpsed this eyeless figure inside locked signal rooms report overwhelming panic attacks. Even more unnerving are the shadowy figures that seem to mimic the movements of those who see them, mirroring every step and gesture like a twisted reflection. Witnesses describe breaking eye contact as the only way to make these dark doppelgangers vanish, leaving a lingering feeling of having looked into something profoundly wrong. Other reports consist of workers losing track of time while underground. Moments stretch into hours, with no memory of what happened in between. Some have woken with unexplained bruises, while others have heard announcements calling trains from decades past, trains that never arrive. Activity has been reported to become physical in some areas, where staff have felt icy, clammy hands reach out from cracks in the tunnel walls, grabbing at their arms with an unnatural coldness that sometimes brings sharp pain or crushing pressure. An overpowering smell of decay or burnt gunpowder often precedes these encounters, a nauseating scent that fills certain tunnel sections without any apparent source, intensifying the dread that weighs on those who pass through. There are also accounts of apparitions that physically interact with the environment, not just fleeting shadows or whispers, but objects moving with force, doors slamming shut on their own, and even unexplained scratches appearing on equipment or walls. One particular account involves a lone maintenance worker who felt something grip his ankle and pull him into a dark recess, only to break free and run to safety. After this incident, he quit his job and refused ever to return underground. Some who have spent time in the station report vivid, intrusive visions of past tragedies, glimpses of people suffering during the Blitz, being trapped in collapsing tunnels, or even violent executions from centuries ago. These visions can be so intense that they have been known to leave lasting psychological scars. Multiple staff have also reported recurring nightmares involving tunnels collapsing, screams, and being chased by unseen entities, dreams so vivid they affect waking life, causing anxiety, insomnia, and paranoia. Hyde Park Corner is more than just a stop on the tube. It's a portal to the past, where shadows of history refuse to fade. The restless spirits trapped beneath London's streets remind us that some places are haunted not just by ghosts, but by the very tragedies that shaped them. Thank you for watching. If you liked the content, then your support would be greatly appreciated. See you next time.